Hey everyone, I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying upload. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more of the content you love. I don't know why I agreed to this. Looking back, it seemed like a good idea at the time. A casual night out, something to break the routine. I hadn't been on a date in months, and this guy, well, he seemed normal enough. His name was Jason, and he was one of those guys who had just enough charm to make you think he was different. Not like the other guys who only talked about their jobs or their weekend plans. Jason had this way of listening, making you feel like you were the only person in the room. So when he suggested we go to a small indie movie theater, I thought, why not? A little quirky, a little artsy. The kind of place that doesn't play the latest blockbuster, but instead focuses on weird, experimental films. I'd never been, but it sounded intriguing, and if nothing else, it was different. The night started off fine. We walked into the theater, and it was just as I imagined, dimly lit with mismatched chairs, posters of films I'd never heard of on the walls. The air smelled like old popcorn and something musty, like the building hadn't been cleaned in years. Jason got the tickets, and we made our way inside. It was cozy, the kind of place where you feel like you're in someone's living room rather than a commercial movie theater. There were only a few people scattered around, which was a relief. I wasn't in the mood for a crowd. The movie hadn't started yet, so we sat down and chatted for a bit. Jason had this way of making me feel at ease, like I wasn't sitting there with a guy I didn't know very well. We talked about everything, movies, music, childhood stories, the usual. I was starting to feel pretty good about this whole blind date thing, especially after the last few awkward ones I'd been on. Then, the lights went down, and the screen flickered to life. But it wasn't the feature film. Instead, an eerie black and white short film began to play. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect in a place like this. The footage was shaky, like someone had filmed it on an old camera without a tripod. At first, I thought it was one of those experimental art pieces, the kind where there's no clear narrative, just weird imagery. But then it hit me. The film started with a shot of a neighborhood. It looked like any other suburban street, tree-lined with houses spaced out, neat lawns. The kind of place you'd expect people to walk their dogs or kids to ride bikes. It was peaceful, normal, but there was something off about it. The camera zoomed in on a particular house, and my stomach did this weird flip. I couldn't place why it felt so familiar. Then it hit me. The house was mine. I froze. My mind raced, but I couldn't move. I didn't want to look at Jason. I didn't want him to see the look on my face, but I knew I had to. So I slowly turned my head to glance at him. He was sitting there, relaxed, watching the screen with this small smirk on his face. I quickly looked back at the screen. The camera zoomed in on my front door. My porch light flickered, then it cut to a shot of my bedroom window, the blinds partially closed. The camera lingered, like someone was watching. I felt my heart start to pound. This wasn't some random footage. This was my home. This was my life. The short film continued, showing various angles of the house. Some shots were from the street, others seemed to be from someone standing across the yard, hidden in the trees. I couldn't tell if it was an artistic choice, or if it was meant to make me feel exposed. Either way, I was starting to feel trapped. I wanted to get up, walk out, but my body wouldn't move. And then came the worst part. The final shot. The camera zoomed in on my front door, and I could see the faint outline of a figure standing just beyond the glass. It was too dark to make out any details, but I knew it was someone who shouldn't have been there. I looked at Jason again. He was still smirking, but now there was something more unsettling about his expression. It wasn't a smile. It was like he was watching me, waiting for me to figure it out. My throat felt dry. I couldn't breathe properly. The credits started to roll, and the lights came back on. I sat there staring at the screen. My mind was spinning. I couldn't focus. I didn't know what to do. Jason was still sitting next to me, still with that damn smirk on his face. I wanted to ask him what the hell that was. I wanted to scream at him. But I didn't. I was too scared, too confused. I tried to play it cool. Tried to act like I hadn't just watched my own house being filmed from the outside, but it wasn't working. Jason leaned back in his seat, stretching his arms behind his head. He looked at me, and I couldn't tell if he was enjoying my reaction or if he was just amused by the whole situation. I forced a smile. I think I said something about the film being weird or something, but it felt hollow. I didn't want to stay, but I didn't know how to leave without making it obvious. He stood up first, as if nothing had happened, like the short film we just watched didn't matter. I followed him, trying to act like everything was fine. He led the way out of the theater, and I couldn't help but notice that there was something wrong with the way he walked. It was too calm, too casual. Outside, the night air was cold, and the streetlights flickered, casting strange shadows on the sidewalk. Jason walked ahead of me, hands in his pockets. I tried to stay close without getting too close. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was enjoying this, enjoying my discomfort. "Hey, that film, it was kind of intense, don't you think?" I said, my voice shaking. I wasn't sure why I even bothered to ask. I knew what I saw. He knew what I saw. Jason stopped walking and turned to face me. He tilted his head like he was considering what I said, but his expression was unreadable. The smirk was gone, replaced by something colder, something darker. "I didn't make it, if that's what you're wondering," he said finally, but I didn't believe him. I could tell by the way he said it, by the look in his eyes. It was like he was testing me, waiting for me to catch on. I didn't know what to say after that. I just stood there, staring at him, trying to figure out if I was overreacting or if something much worse was going on. But in that moment, I realized something. I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. The walk back to my car was quiet, too quiet. Jason kept his distance, but I could feel him watching me the entire time. When I finally got in my car, I couldn't get away fast enough. I didn't even say goodbye. I don't think I ever will. It was supposed to be a normal night. You know, one of those nights where you meet someone new, get some drinks, catch a movie, and maybe end up with a new friend, or, if you're lucky, a date for the next weekend. I had met this guy, Nate, on a dating app. He seemed nice enough in his pictures, a little quirky, but in a good way. He didn't come across as one of those guys who talks about himself nonstop, which I liked. Instead, he asked about me, which made things feel normal, I guess. After chatting for a couple of days, we decided to meet up for a movie. The theater was packed, but it wasn't the kind of packed where people are standing, elbowing each other for popcorn. It was one of those smaller indie places. Dim lights, a cool vibe. I liked it, felt intimate, cozy, the kind of place where you can focus on the film without distractions. The movie we were going to see was some thriller I had heard mixed reviews about, but Nate was super excited about it. He seemed a little too excited, honestly. But whatever, it was fine. I wasn't expecting much, just a quiet evening. So, we found our seats. I remember how dark it was, with the only light coming from the screen and the soft glow of phones here and there. The movie started and we both settled in. I was trying to focus on the film, but I couldn't ignore how tightly Nate was sitting next to me. He kept leaning in closer with every plot twist, as if he couldn't wait for me to be as amazed as he was. It was a bit much, but I shrugged it off. He was just enthusiastic, right? About halfway through the movie, things started to get weird. The theater was pretty quiet, too quiet, considering how packed it was. People were absorbed in the film, some shuffling in their seats, others muttering under their breath about how intense the plot was. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice. At first, I thought it was just someone talking during the film, which honestly happens way too often in places like this. But then the voice got louder. It wasn't a casual comment, it was more like shouting. I didn't think it was aimed at me at first, but then I heard it again. Clearer this time, more aggressive. "Hey you," the voice yelled. I looked around trying to figure out who was shouting, but everyone seemed to be focused on the movie. I glanced at Nate, and he was sitting there, looking at the screen like nothing was happening. His face was glued to the plot, totally unaware, or at least pretending to be. "You, in the black hoodie," the voice continued, growing louder. "I know it's you. Don't pretend. I saw you." I felt my stomach flip. I looked toward the voice. A man was standing in the aisle, pointing directly at me. His face was twisted with anger, his eyes wide with a crazy intensity. He wasn't looking at anyone else, his entire focus was on me. I froze. My heart started beating faster. I didn't recognize this guy at all. I scanned the theater again, but everyone else seemed to be pretending they hadn't heard him. Some even glanced at me, clearly trying to figure out what was going on, but no one said anything. My mind was racing. Was this some sort of prank? Was I in danger? The man took a few steps closer, still shouting, his voice now full of accusation. "I'm not stupid. I know you took it. Where is it?" he yelled. I felt all the blood drain from my face. What the hell was he talking about? What did he think I took? My palms started to sweat, and I could feel my body tense up. I wanted to just get up and leave, but I couldn't move. The guy was blocking the aisle, and I didn't want to make a scene. Then I noticed something even stranger. Nate was still sitting there, unmoved. I glanced at him. He wasn't staring at the screen anymore. He was looking at me, but not with concern or confusion. Instead, he was smirking. Why the hell was he smirking? The man in the aisle was still yelling. I could hear the desperation in his voice now. "Where's my stuff? You can't just take from me and walk away like nothing happened. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did." I had no idea who this guy was. I had no idea what he was talking about. But the panic was setting in. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my breath getting shallow. Was I being targeted? Was I in danger? I couldn't make sense of it, but the whole thing felt off. By now, security had started to move through the aisles, pushing past the other moviegoers. One of the guards approached the guy, asking him to calm down and step outside. The man wasn't having it. He started shouting more, his voice cracking with frustration as they escorted him out. "You're all in on it," he shouted one last time as they led him out of the theater. "You'll all see." When the door closed behind him, the theater was silent. Everyone was looking around, probably wondering what the hell just happened. I felt like my heart was still pounding in my chest, my mind racing 1,000,000 miles a minute. I needed a second to process everything, to understand what had just gone down. But I wasn't alone in this. I turned back to Nate, hoping for some kind of explanation, some reassurance. He was texting. Not only that, but he was laughing. I felt a cold wave of realization hit me. He hadn't been concerned at all. It wasn't like he didn't care. It was almost like he was amused by the whole thing. His eyes were glued to his phone, his fingers tapping away, and I could see the smile creeping onto his face. I stared at him, confused. Was he in on this? Was this some kind of sick joke? Did he know that guy? Why was he laughing? I wanted to ask him what the hell was going on, but I couldn't find the words. I felt so stupid. The whole time I'd been trusting him, but now everything felt wrong. Every little thing about him, every little detail felt like a lie. When the movie ended, the lights came back up. People slowly started filing out of the theater, chatting about the movie, looking at their phones. But I was stuck in place, staring at Nate as he finished his texting and slipped his phone into his pocket. He looked at me then, still smiling. "That was crazy, huh?" he said. "What a scene." I just nodded, trying to control the anger bubbling up in me. I wanted to scream at him, ask him why he hadn't helped, why he didn't even seem worried. But I didn't. I just stood there, feeling like I was on a completely different page from him. We left the theater in silence, and I didn't say another word to him. When I got to my car, I didn't even look back. I didn't need to. I don't know what kind of person he was, or why that man came after me. But one thing's for sure, I never spoke to Nate again. Not once. Something about that night told me it was better to just walk away and forget everything. It was supposed to be a regular Friday night, nothing too special, just a movie and some snacks to unwind. We had just moved in together, and everything was still fresh. The excitement of decorating the apartment, figuring out our routines, and all that good stuff was still lingering. My boyfriend Luke was sitting on the couch, and I was in the kitchen, pulling out the bags of popcorn and chips. We didn't plan on anything too extravagant, just a lazy night in. The living room was dimly lit, just how we liked it when we watched movies. The glow from the TV set illuminated the place in a comfortable, cozy way. I set everything down on the coffee table and flopped down beside him. He didn't seem as relaxed as usual, though. I noticed it when I sat down. He was fidgeting, his fingers drumming on his knee. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just tired from work. The trailers were rolling, and as always, we started making fun of some of the ridiculous ones. I like to joke about how some movies were just ridiculous, so predictable, you could call the plot before it even started. Luke laughed, but his eyes kept shifting, like something was bothering him. I didn't say anything at first. We were both used to joking around in silence during the previews. But then something caught my eye. There was this one actor, some guy in a suit, looking all serious like he was in some high-stakes drama. He was tall, dark hair, and had that intense expression. For a second, I froze. I mean, it couldn't have been, right? The guy on screen looked exactly like Luke. Same facial features, same posture, even the same damn suit. I leaned closer to the TV, my eyes glued to the screen, feeling the oddest sense of déjà vu. I laughed a little, trying to brush it off. "Okay, that's creepy. Is that you?" Luke glanced at the screen but didn't laugh. His face had gone all tight. His usual easygoing demeanor vanished. "What do you mean?" he said, his voice sounding a bit too sharp. It wasn't angry, but there was something in it. I thought maybe he just didn't like the joke, but it didn't feel like that. There was an edge to his words, like something was off. I chuckled again, trying to lighten the mood. "You sure you're not secretly an actor or something? 'Cause that's freaky. You even got the same outfit on." It was a stupid thing to say, and I didn't mean anything by it. But the way he shifted his weight on the couch, how his eyes darted to the TV and then back to me, made me feel uncomfortable. A weird tension filled the air. The laughter I expected never came from him. He suddenly stood up too fast, like he was trying to shake off some bad vibe. "We need to go," he said. His voice had an urgency to it, but it wasn't like he was panicking. It was more like he was avoiding something, but I had no idea what. I blinked. "What? Go where?" "We should leave. Let's just go out for a walk or something." I was caught off guard. What the hell was going on? This was way out of character for him. He was always the one who was up for a chill night, especially after a long week. And now suddenly he wanted to bail? I was just about to ask him why when he grabbed his jacket and headed toward the door. He didn't even look at me. I followed him, confused and more than a little worried. "Luke, are you okay? What's going on?" He didn't answer. He was too focused on getting out the door. The way he moved was weird too, like he was trying to avoid something, someone. I kept following him, wondering if I was overthinking this whole thing. Maybe I'd said something wrong. I mean, the whole situation didn't seem like a big deal at first, but the more I thought about it, the stranger it got. Why had he reacted that way? What was he hiding? Once we were outside, I tried again to get some answers. The cool air hit me as I stepped into the hallway. My mind was racing, but Luke wasn't saying anything. It was like he'd completely shut down. I didn't want to push him too much, but I needed to know what was going on. We stood there for a minute, silence stretching between us like a thick fog, and then, like the weight of it all hit him, Luke just snapped. His face went pale, his hands trembling slightly as he took a deep breath. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "I don't want to go back there. Not yet." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Back where?" I asked. My voice was shaky now, unsure if I should press or just leave it. He looked at me then, finally, eyes wild and searching. "I don't know why you keep saying that," he murmured. "I'm not the guy you think I am. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm not him." That was when I realized something wasn't just off, it was wrong. The more he said, the more everything felt like it was unraveling, like I was missing something big, something vital, but I didn't know what to do with it. It was like I was stuck, standing at the edge of something I couldn't even begin to understand. We ended up walking in silence for a long time. By the time we got back to the apartment, Luke was quiet. The tension that had filled the air earlier seemed to have left, but something else lingered. Something heavy. I didn't say anything more, though. I wasn't sure what there was left to say. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the actor on the screen. I kept thinking about how the guy looked exactly like Luke, down to the smallest detail. It wasn't just the outfit. It was the way he held himself, the look in his eyes. It was him, or it felt like him. But that wasn't possible, right? Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the whole thing was a coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure what it was. And when I looked over at Luke, lying beside me in bed, I couldn't quite tell if he was the person I thought he was, or if he ever had been. It feels like I'm going crazy just thinking about it. But here's the story, and you can believe it or not. I'm just trying to make sense of it. I met Erica online. She seemed chill, funny, not like the other people I'd met on those apps. We talked for a while before finally deciding to go out. She suggested a movie, and since I'm always down for that, I agreed. She mentioned an old theater that was kind of out of the way, but I figured why not? Sometimes it's fun to watch movies in those old rundown places, right? There's something about them that feels a little more intimate, a little more real. This theater was definitely old. It wasn't like the fancy multiplexes with recliner seats and perfect sound systems. No, this was one of those spots where the floor was sticky, the air smelled musty, and the seats were cracked but still somehow comfortable in a weird way. There were only a few people in the theater, so it wasn't crowded. It was late too, which added to the vibe. The whole thing felt like a secret, like we were in on something that wasn't meant for everyone. We got our tickets and made our way to the seats. I don't know why, but the place gave off this odd energy. Maybe it was because it was almost deserted. Maybe because it had that old school feeling, but it just didn't feel right. But Erica seemed fine, laughing and chatting about random stuff, so I pushed those thoughts away. After all, we were there for a movie, right? Nothing weird was going to happen. The movie started, and for the first half, everything was fine. Typical, even. The film was okay. Not great, but not terrible either. We were both into it, kind of laughing at the cheesy parts, trying to guess what was going to happen next. Then, about halfway through, the screen flickered. It wasn't one of those quick flashes that you sometimes see when the film breaks, though. No, this felt different. The screen went completely blank for a moment, and I heard the whirring of the projector, which made sense because it was one of those old machines. But when the screen came back on, It was showing something that didn't belong. It wasn't the movie anymore. It was a grainy black and white image of an empty theater. The seats were all empty, except for one or two scattered here and there. It was hard to make out details because the image was so blurry, but that's all it was at first. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was some weird pre-show thing. I'd seen those kinds of experimental art films at festivals before, but then something strange happened. The camera angle shifted, and the footage zoomed in. The screen now showed our seats. It was a view from behind, but I could tell instantly that it was us sitting there, me and Erica. The thing was, the seats were empty in the footage, but we were still sitting there in the theater watching the movie. The camera moved closer, showing us from behind, like someone was standing there filming us. I felt a weird chill run down my spine. I looked at Erica, who was still staring at the screen, but I could tell she was starting to notice too. Her smile had faded, and her eyes were locked on the image of us sitting in those seats. It wasn't a weird coincidence or some bizarre glitch. It was us. We were being filmed, in real time, while still sitting there. I couldn't make sense of it. How was this happening? Who was filming us? I turned to look behind us, but there was nothing. The theater was empty, just like it had been before. I felt my stomach twist, and I started to feel dizzy. I wanted to leave, but for some reason I couldn't move. I just kept staring at the screen, watching us being filmed from behind. The footage on the screen zoomed in further, showing our faces this time, but the graininess made it look distorted. It was like watching someone's home movie, but it was us. We were sitting there, laughing at the movie, totally unaware of what was going on. I turned to Erica again, and now she was visibly freaked out. Her face was pale, and she was fidgeting with her phone, looking around nervously. I tried to say something to her, but I couldn't get the words out. I was too shaken by what I was seeing. How could this be happening? How could they possibly know what we were doing? Then, as quickly as it had started, the footage cut out. The screen flickered again, and we were back to the movie. The scene resumed, like nothing had happened, but the air in the theater had changed. It felt heavy, suffocating almost. The lights seemed dimmer now, the place colder. I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. My mind kept going back to what I'd seen. I had to know what was going on. I stood up trying to make sense of it, but Erica grabbed my arm, pulling me back down. I don't like this," she whispered, her voice shaky. She was freaking out now too. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to be rude, especially not in front of her. I looked down at the aisle, trying to figure out what to do. It was silent. No one else was reacting. No one else seemed to have noticed what had just happened. The whole thing felt like a bad dream. I started thinking maybe I was just imagining it, or maybe I'd misinterpreted what I saw. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I hadn't. When the movie finally ended, we rushed out of the theater. My mind was spinning, and I could barely even look at Erica. We got to the front, and I asked the staff if they'd seen anything weird with the film. They just stared at me as if I was crazy. "No, everything's fine," the guy at the counter said, his tone flat, like I was just another weirdo. "Nothing's been tampered with." I tried to explain, but the more I talked, the more they seemed to dismiss me. The staff didn't even seem concerned, like this was a normal thing that happened all the time. But I knew what I saw. Erica knew it too. I could see it in her eyes. We left without saying much else. I don't think either of us knew what to say. I haven't talked to Erica since that night. She texted me the next day, but the conversation was strained. We didn't bring up the theater. We both knew what we saw, but we didn't know how to explain it. Maybe we never will. I don't go back to that theater. I don't even drive near it anymore. It's like something happened that night that can't be undone. And no matter what anyone says, I know what I saw. I've been on a few bad dates in my time, awkward silences, forced laughs, and the usual, "I'm not really feeling this, but I'll power through it" kind of thing. But this one was different. It was unsettling, creepy, and honestly, I still don't know what happened that night. The whole experience left me questioning everything. So, let me tell you about the worst blind date I've ever been on. I still don't think I've fully processed it. It started off normal enough. I met Jenna through a dating app, and we hit it off pretty quickly. She seemed cool, had a good sense of humor, and we both enjoyed the same kinds of movies. We talked for a few weeks before we decided to meet up. She suggested a late-night screening at an old movie theater downtown. It was one of those places that's been around for decades, showing mostly indie films and old classics. The kind of theater where the seats are a little worn out, the lights flicker a bit, but it has this weird charm. I thought it sounded fun, so I agreed. When I got there, Jenna was already waiting outside. She looked even better in person, which was nice because let's be real, I wasn't sure what I was walking into. We talked for a bit while we walked inside. The theater was empty, like almost eerily empty. There were maybe 3 other people scattered around. It was a little too quiet, but I shrugged it off. Sometimes these older theaters just don't get a lot of foot traffic. We grabbed some snacks, found our seats, and settled in. The movie started pretty soon after we got settled. It was some art house horror film that neither of us had seen before, and we were both kind of excited to see how weird it would get. We didn't talk much during the film, but I could tell Jenna was into it. The whole theater felt like it was swallowed up by darkness except for the flickering screen in front of us. It was kind of cool, to be honest. About halfway through the movie, Jenna excused herself to use the restroom. I didn't think much of it at first. People get up during movies all the time, right? But after a while, I started to get a little worried. It had been at least 15 minutes, and she still hadn't come back. I checked my phone, wondering if maybe she texted me or something, but nothing. So I got up to look for her. I wandered through the theater, hoping she was just taking a little longer than expected. The lobby was empty, just the cashier behind the counter staring blankly at the screen, not really doing anything. I walked down the hallway towards the restrooms, but I didn't see her. I checked both restrooms, but they were both empty. My anxiety started to creep in. Where the hell was she? She had only gone to the restroom, not vanished into thin air. I decided to go back into the theater and check again, but that's when things got strange. I made my way down the aisle toward the exit, and that's when I noticed something odd. The exit doors, the ones that lead out to the street, were chained shut. There was a huge padlock on them, and the chains were tight. I could have sworn they were wide open when we first came in, but now they were completely blocked off. My heart started racing. Why the hell would they chain the doors shut? There was no reason for that. The staff hadn't said anything about leaving early or an emergency, so this just didn't make sense. I turned to the guy at the counter, but he didn't seem to notice me. He was just staring at the screen like he was in some kind of trance. It was almost as if I was the only one in the theater who had noticed the doors were chained up. I walked back toward the seats, scanning the empty rows, but still no sign of Jenna. The whole place felt suffocating now. The air was thick, and the quiet was almost oppressive. That's when I heard it, a faint whispering. It was so soft at first that I thought I was imagining it, but no, it was real. The whispers echoed through the theater like a distant murmur, as if someone was speaking in hushed tones. I turned around, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but it felt like it was coming from everywhere. I called out for Jenna, but my voice sounded too loud in the silence, and there was no answer. The whispers continued, growing louder but still unintelligible, just a constant hum in the background. I swear it sounded like multiple voices, but they were all so faint, like they were coming from someplace far away. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I went back to the exit doors to see if I could somehow get them open. I yanked on the chains, but they didn't budge. The lock was solid, and I had no idea how to get it off. Panic started to settle in. This wasn't right. Something was wrong. I tried to call Jenna's phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. Great. Just great. I went back inside to the lobby and tried to talk to the staff. The guy behind the counter was still just staring at the screen, looking completely out of it. It was like he didn't even notice me standing there, asking him if he'd seen Jenna, asking him why the exit doors were locked. I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. At this point, I was freaking out. I couldn't just sit there and wait. I started looking for a way out. I checked every door I could find, but they were all locked. The whispering kept getting louder, and it was starting to make my skin crawl. Finally, I decided to just leave, even if I had to break the lock or climb out a window. But when I turned to leave, I noticed something that stopped me cold. There was a small desk near the back exit where the tickets are usually checked. The guy at the counter was still zoning out, and sitting right there on the desk was a ticket for Jenna. It was clearly a single ticket. I hadn't seen it when we first got there, but there it was now. The weird part? Her name wasn't on it. It was blank. No name, no date, just a ticket for a single person. I felt my stomach drop. That's when I realized. There was no record of Jenna ever buying a ticket. No one had seen her. No one knew who she was. I bolted out of the theater as fast as I could, feeling like I was about to lose it. I don't know what happened that night, but something was seriously wrong with that place. I haven't been back since, and I've never heard from Jenna again. I still don't understand what I saw, or who, or what was whispering in that theater. But I know one thing for sure, whatever it wasn't normal. I'm not sure where to start with this one, but I think the best way to explain it is, Never, ever take your date to a movie when you feel even a little off about it. Trust me, things can get really weird really fast. It started like any other date. I met Sarah through a dating app, and we hit it off pretty quickly. She was funny, easy to talk to, and she had this genuine energy that made everything feel relaxed. We had been chatting for a couple of weeks before we decided to meet in person. She suggested a movie, and I thought it was a good idea. I'm a huge fan of films, and I figured it would give us something to talk about afterward. We picked a popular movie that was playing at this big theater downtown. The place was packed. I mean, people everywhere. I hadn't been in a theater this crowded in a while, but I didn't think much of it. We grabbed our tickets and made our way to our seats, weaving through the aisles and trying not to bump into anyone. I'm not sure where to start with this one, but I think the best way to explain it is never, ever take your date to a movie when you feel even a little off about it. Trust me, things can get really weird really fast. It started like any other date. I met Sarah through a dating app, and we hit it off pretty quickly. She was funny, easy to talk to, and she had this genuine energy that made everything feel relaxed. We had been chatting for a couple of weeks before we decided to meet in person. She suggested a movie, and I thought it was a good idea. I'm a huge fan of films, and I figured it would give us something to talk about afterward. We picked a popular movie that was playing at this big theater downtown. The place was packed. I mean, people everywhere. I hadn't been in a theater this crowded in a while, but I didn't think much of it. We grabbed our tickets and made our way to our seats, weaving through the aisles and trying not to bump into anyone. Sarah was super chill about everything. She even laughed when she almost tripped over a stray popcorn kernel. It felt like one of those easy, no-pressure dates. We found our seats toward the middle, not too far from the screen, but just enough where you didn't feel like you were too close to the action. The movie started, and everything was fine for the first part. We joked around a little, commenting on how cheesy some of the lines were. I could tell Sarah was into it, laughing at the funny parts and reacting to the suspenseful ones. It was one of those moments where you just feel comfortable and in sync with someone. But then, about halfway through the movie, something weird happened. I was munching on my popcorn when I saw a man walking down the aisle toward us. He didn't seem like he was with anyone, and he was staring straight at Sarah. At first, I thought he was just making his way down to his seat, but then he stopped in front of us and looked right at her. The look on his face was strange, almost like he recognized her, or maybe it was something more intense than that. He leaned forward, almost hovering, and then said something that completely threw me off. "Hey, that's my seat." "You're in my seat." I blinked, confused. "What?" I looked at Sarah, and she was just as confused as I was. She was sitting there, hands in her lap, looking up at him like he had just made no sense at all. We both had our tickets in hand, and I could see my own ticket stub peeking out of my jacket pocket. I stood up and said something like, "I think you've got the wrong seats, man," but he wasn't listening to me. He just kept staring at Sarah like he was trying to figure her out. I reached into my pocket, took out our tickets, and showed them to him, thinking maybe he had made a mistake. The tickets matched the row and seats we were in, but the guy didn't seem to care. His face stayed blank, but there was something in his eyes like he was hiding some kind of knowing. That's when things got really weird. Instead of backing off, like any normal person would, he leaned closer to Sarah. He was close enough that I could hear him whisper. His voice was low and almost too calm for the situation. The words he said sent a chill straight down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here." The way he said it felt wrong, almost like a warning, but not one that made any sense. Sarah, looking pretty freaked out by now, didn't even reply. She just looked at him, her eyes wide, not knowing how to respond. I stood there, unsure of what to do next. My first instinct was to tell him to get lost, but something about the way he was standing there made me hesitate. Like he wasn't just some random person who had gotten his seat mixed up. There was something else there, something I couldn't put my finger on. After what felt like an eternity, the guy finally straightened up. He didn't apologize. He didn't move out of our row. He just turned and started walking back down the aisle. I kept my eyes on him the whole time, watching as he blended back into the crowd of people watching the movie, like he had never been there in the first place. I looked at Sarah, and I could tell she was shaken up. We sat there in silence for a minute, both of us just trying to process what had just happened. The movie was still playing, but it felt like it was in the background now. All I could think about was that guy. What did he mean by "you shouldn't have come here"? What the hell was that all about? I tried to shake it off, telling myself that maybe he was just some weirdo who had lost his seat and had a weird way of dealing with it. But honestly, something didn't sit right with me. I kept looking at Sarah, but she was staring at the screen now, her face pale. I tried to focus on the movie too, but I couldn't get that guy's words out of my head. What was his deal? Why did he even say that? Finally, after what felt like forever, the movie ended. We both got up, grabbed our things, and started walking toward the exit. As we made our way out, I noticed the theater staff at the doors, just standing there, watching people leave. I glanced over at Sarah, but she wasn't talking much. She seemed like she was in her own head. We walked out of the theater, and I thought maybe once we were outside, I could ask her about the whole situation. Maybe she had a better explanation. Maybe she'd seen something I hadn't. But before I could even say anything, she stopped walking. I turned to look at her, and she just shook her head. "I don't know, that was just strange," she said, her voice a little distant. She gave me a half-hearted smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. We said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, but the whole night just felt off. I kept thinking about that guy, what he said, and the way Sarah reacted. The thing is, I never saw him again. I haven't heard from Sarah either. I reached out a couple of times, but she never responded. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was all just a weird coincidence, but the look on that guy's face and the way he said those words, it still haunts me. It's been a few weeks since that night, and I haven't really been able to shake it off. So yeah, if you're ever in a packed theater and some stranger approaches your date like that, don't just brush it off. Something about it wasn't normal.